Wiley up there in the back row? Yes? Okay. Thank you all for coming here tonight. Needless to say, we're thrilled that Kehinde Wiley, A New Republic, is being presented here at the Modern Art Museum in Fort Worth. And I had a chance to walk through the show briefly before this conversation, and I have to congratulate Andrea Carnes for her beautiful installation. You are all in for a treat. And tonight, of course, is a special occasion and opportunity to hear from the man himself, our star, Kehinde Wiley. I'm going to ask him a few questions, and I have a few visuals. The visuals are merely a kind of taste of what you're going to see upstairs, a little tease. And then we'll have 10 minutes for questions from the audience. So here, I'm just showing you the cover of the catalog. Run to the store and buy it. It's really great. It has beautiful illustrations. And my first question for Kehinde is, well, I actually want to start with an image. I'm showing this image of the Huntington Library where I went to visit last year after hearing that Kehinde had gone there as a child. And it was a pretty amazing place. So let's start at the beginning. Your childhood in South Central Los Angeles seems remarkably ordinary, but was clearly rather extraordinary. So tell us about that and how your interest in art evolved. I mean, when did you know you were going to be an artist?
Bear with me, guys. I have a little bit of a cough. So.
Kehinde is a little under the weather, but we're thrilled that he's still here with us.
We're going to get through it. No, I think that's a great place to start. And part of it is just because, as Eugenie, you've been to that space, it's not just the art on the walls. It's the experience of going through urban Los Angeles, getting off of the freeway, walking through these magnificent gardens, extraordinary Japanese gardens, extraordinary old school English gardens. And then you walk into these halls where, for a kid like me who was studying painting at easily 11 years old, I'm looking at stuff now that, I had never imagined people could achieve that level of mastery in paintings. Their collection has all of these 18th and 19th century society portraits, powerful landed gentry, a lot of powdered wigs and lapdogs. In the end, coming from South Central LA and having the perspective and the experience that I had, sure, there was a gulf, I think, experientially in terms of understanding the trappings of social class and empire and all of that simplicity in terms of what goes into making those paintings and their histories. I think what I was in love with more than anything was just the technical mastery of it. To be able to return to that conversation years later as someone who had finished his art studies and moved from just the sheer technical aspect of painting to the more conceptual aspects, that personal story, my own personal lineage, is throughout everything that you see, and it starts exactly here.
How did you get there? It seems very far from South Central. Did you go with your parents or with classmates?
To the library itself. Well,
it's in Pasadena, which, as you say, is a little out of...
Well, actually, my mother sent me to art classes when I was 11 years old. And part of that school, it was a weekend class thing. And so it was me and my twin brother, and we would get on the bus. And it would take us about 2 hours to get from our home to art class on the weekends. And so it was 4 hours in traffic every weekend. But it was an opportunity for he and I to bond, to competitively make drawings on the buses together. But also to just get out of that environment. We're talking about the 1980s in South Central Los Angeles. I go back there now and it's just completely different. I mean, it's just really hard to imagine psychically what kind of need there was to enhance your worldview. And I thank my mother every day for that. I mean, she was one of those crazy moms who would just come up with stuff. We didn't have any money at all. She was working on her master's degree at USC, but she was raising 6 kids as a single parent. We were just barely getting by, but she would find things like an all-Jewish summer camp, and it was like me and my twin brothers. And like we were the scholarship kids. And then there was when I was 12 years old, the Center for USSR Initiatives, this is back in 1989 when there was a USSR, run by the Central Intelligence Agency, had this cultural affairs office, and they sent me, along with 50 other Americans, to Russia to study art and to study painting in the forest outside of St. Petersburg. Again, one of those things that you just don't expect of someone who happens to look like me from that place in that time. My mother created this strange little garden for us to grow up in, where, sure, we were economically impoverished, but we were enriched in ways that you can't imagine. She started this fire, and it got me looking at picture making, got me looking at the seams of where identity lies, the cracks that lie between where I live and where I get bused to go to school in the other parts of town, the social injustices that undergird the realities of everyday life, that later explain some of the realities of sugar plantations and cocoa farms and the amassing of wealth, the fashioning of gilded frames that then house major paintings of powerful people that hundreds of years later I'm revisiting and breathing some sort of new way of thinking about those people, that time, that struggle. But is it all angry black man stuff? No, I think oftentimes it just comes back down to that sheer mystery, that love of painting, that looking at this thing and being like, wow, that's weird, but I really want to play this game somehow.
I'd like to see your work in the Huntington Library. So after you received your BFA in 1999 from the San Francisco Art Institute, you then left the West Coast to study at Yale University's Visual Arts program, which is one of the most highly regarded programs in the country, and one that's perceived as a bastion of privilege. So how do you think your time at Yale shaped you as an artist, the artist you are today?
Good question. Yale's not easy. I mean, it's one of those places where...
crack up there.
Listen, I was right on that edge. But I knew from the beginning that I wanted more than just your standard art school education. I wanted to be able to... I saw Yale as this insane buffet court of languages and of histories, and I threw myself not only into the painting department, but I TA'd for the art history departments. I ended up doing several courses of language study there, and just really wanted to squeeze every bit out of the experience that I could, because I knew that I was just so improbably positioned here, and that I really should value it as an experience, and I did. There is a social dynamic that you can't deny. The city of New Haven is a broadly black and brown town where the school itself sits like a citadel at its core. And as a graduate student, I'm expected to live off campus. And so there's this interesting thing with campus police where it's like, okay, are you supposed to be here on the other side of this wall? And so there's this strange navigating of the two worlds there. That said, it's that weirdness of experience that I think any artist can thrive on. It's a wall to throw yourself up against. It's a means by which you can measure what normalcy supposedly is, because that city was nothing short of a miracle. Fast forwarding, once I left there though, it gave me also something to react against. I wanted to get away from all of the ideas that my professors had been teaching me, all of the competitive small dramas that were going on between this kid who thinks they're the next star and this kid who thinks they're the shit. It was just like really hard to imagine yourself outside of this group of peers. And what happens is the world will let you know very quickly that those petty concerns of yours were exactly that. Moving to New York, I I decided to just sort of go into this space where I concentrated on space and place, where I was at the time, the streets of Harlem. I was at the Studio Museum in Harlem and got an opportunity to really...
Right after you got your MFA.
That's
so
right.
You moved straight from New Haven to New York.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea what I was going to do after school, and I got that call, and it was a perfect opportunity to throw myself into the studio again, but this time on my own terms. This time I started concentrating on a type of black masculinity that was oftentimes misunderstood or couldn't possibly be processed at Yale. Everything at the school was intellectualized to a point of sterility. And what I wanted to do was to sort of allow things to grow out of control, much like the sort of Samsonian hair.
Grow out of control, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is conspicuous fraud, and that's...
Right. This is actually the last painting I made at Yale for the final review, my sort of thumbs up on the way out. And it's called Conspicuous Fraud, and it comes from, I believe, 2000, 2001.
2001, right before you left.
Yeah. And what it was this outgrowth of very simple color theory stuff that I was thinking about quite a bit at Yale, thinking about the ways that color functions socially. You have to realize that color is something that's so deeply coded in our society. Think about fast food, McDonald's, Burger King. It's always oranges and reds and yellows, never blues or greens. Fast food is always within that reddish range. Color, social. This is Martha Stewart's Seafoam Green from her 1999 home collection. What I wanted to do here was to sort of look at taste and that sort of very proper Connecticut sensibility fused with this sort of irrational hair, thinking about hair in that biblical Samsonian sense, hypersexualized, color also playing a part in that. And this was obviously the first stab at what would later become a series of investigations of black masculinity.
And when you were at the Studio Museum, you devised you kind of breathed out the whole notion of portraiture. And you came up with a technique that has come to be called street casting. I think that's the name you gave to it.
Yeah.
And which is a very unique form of portraiture, one that that really turns on its head the usual relationship between the power relationship between the artist and the subject, the person in power and the subject. In making this street casting, which is collaborative, which involves the participation, I guess we could say, of the subject. Can you talk about how that came about? I have a picture of you here in a nice Yale hoodie on the street, and I think this is a shot from Passing Posing, the exhibition that was at the Brooklyn Museum in 2004, which featured some of the works that use the street casting technique.
Right.
So how did that happen, radical?
Well, you know, I was in Harlem. I was living my life in that studio, trying to figure out how to make compelling work to me. And I was coming from Los Angeles, thinking about the very different sort of pedestrian energy. In Los Angeles, you're always in your car. You're always mediating space through that car. In Harlem, it was everyone in the streets all the time, densely packed. Saturdays, even more people, more fashionable, more peacocking, more sense of like personal self in the streets. And I loved it. I was fascinated with that energy. I wanted to be able to get that down in painting. I wanted to be able to look at the ways that fashion at the time were just constantly changing. You would see hip-hop music videos. Hype Williams was popular at the time, and that fashion would sort of rise and then decay within weeks, right? Painting is about...
It's like fast food.
That's right. And it's a very black American sensibility. You know, it's part of the sort of hip-hop thing, whatever that is. We don't know quite how to wrap our minds around whether or not hip-hop is just music or fashion or language or speech pattern or body movement or attitude. But in the end, it was the beginning of that in the culture, and I was very excited about it. But this sense about temporality within painting, this presupposition that art will speak about the timeless. It will hold up to society all of those things that we value and want to see indelibly. Is thrown into sharp relief when thinking about the type of social and aesthetic decay that occurs in fashion and in pop culture. And so for me, that was extremely exciting and dangerous. What I did was I just simply went out to the streets and I asked complete strangers to come upstairs and model for me. Most people said no. New York City, it's just not happening. But at the same time, there was this, you mentioned the Yale t-shirt. Oftentimes you'll see my examples of paintings and things, my own work. It's this I'm legitimate thing, right?
So you showed them your...
Well, yeah, I don't wear big Yale t-shirts around. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say to people, okay, this guy's not just some creep. These are actually projects that I think will become actually important paintings. I didn't know that at the time. I thought that I was simply putting myself out into the world and experimenting in Harlem. It was only later that I realized that I was touching a nerve somehow. I knew that I was touching a nerve for myself. I knew that by going into the streets and allowing people to become complicit in this project, by turning up the volume on things like the art history that I like so much. Well, let's get into that. I think I haven't really talked about how we made that leap, but I started off by inviting people to come into the studio, but then after a while, we began having conversations about my interest in art, about the art history books that were on my walls, about why someone would so wastefully spend their lives staring at these pictures and reproducing. But I think for me, for the first time, I saw what I devoted my life to from an outside perspective, and it seemed rather perverse to them. This so wasteful. Your life, you're up in here staring at these paintings and making these things.
But somehow you got them to participate.
Well, that's right. Well, so I opened up these books and I said, well, I think they're fascinating. Why don't you show me your favorite pictures? And so it became this sort of relay race, this back and forth between the pictures that I admired, and then pretty soon I began positioning the subjects as the paintings that they then admired. So it became this same strange back and forth between taste patterns and so on.
And did you photograph them, or how did you?
Yeah, so no one's got the time to sit for a classic portrait. Photograph. But at the same time, though, I learned how to paint from life in the sort of classic way. And painting from photography presents certain unique problems and opportunities. And I think that
So what are the problems?
The problems are that if I place my hand close to the camera, my hand becomes 5 times larger than the eye perceives it to be. If I photograph iridescence or luminescence of certain types, the camera simply can't see it. There are certain limitations. However, there are certain strengths as well. The ability that we now have with Photoshop and some of the new digital imaging tools to reimagine what was there. Most of the paintings that you see are men and women wearing what they happen to be wearing that day that I found them on the street. And then about 15% of them are. And those 15% are always going to be heightened or diminished colors. They're going to be throwing in elements to sort of make this painting shine in a way that plays with the original story, but you as the viewer never know if you're getting the original story or the authentic copy. I want you guys to have this sense of tension between what the real and what the imagined is. What the painting does and what the photo always has done is to present a world to you that is intervened with by the artist. The illusion that happens with photography, and since Photoshop and all of the new stuff, we've lost that love affair with this perceived authenticity in the device. We now know, and we're much more ironically attuned as audiences, that all of these are just small manipulations of our perceptions. I think it's important for artists to reintroduce that in their own work. I think it's important for you to think you're getting one thing and to never quite be sure exactly if this is it. But what I will tell you is that 85% of the time it is. But there's still a good.
So we should think about that when we're walking through the show.
That's right. That's right. When walking through the show, there will be models coming from small villages in West Africa. Years later, I would go on to work in other countries. But in that same show, there's a guy from Brooklyn, right? But you never know who that is. And I'm not telling.
Well, I'm showing you the painting that's opening the show here. Wilhelm van Huysen. Okay, thank you. He's obviously the result of your street casting technique, and he's an example of what we think of as your early signature work, portraits of stylish young black men posed against these amazing decorative backdrops. And many people have remarked on the tension between the figure, which is so sculptural and so believably real, but kind of floating in space, and the flatness of the decorative background. Can you comment about that? They seem almost to be in competition, where you're like the figure, and then you're like, oh, but you know, and how do you hold them in balance, and do you regard them as a competition, or?
Surely, and I think you're getting to the heart of yet another one of my ploys in the work. The relationship between figure and ground is one of the most principal ones that exist in the art history. The history of art. The question is, where does the figure sit in space? The space, whether it be flat or dimensional, is always presumed to be a type of timeline. It's usually in classical paintings a male figure who's standing very erect and self-possessed in the foreground of the painting. He's perceived as being in the present tense because in terms of pictographic space, the present tense would be referenced by the forefront of the picture. To that extent, the landscape itself becomes a timeline, a reference in terms of beginning, middle, and end, a way in which you can see yourself in the present and the past being behind you, oftentimes your land, your wife, your children. Everything that's considered to be a type of possession in this worldview is alive in this work. I think there's something problematic about that, and I have devised a language system in painting that destroys the landscape, that started with the field, the simple colored field that you saw in some of the earlier works, but then later became populated with these sort of decorative allusions to where these poses come from. If the pose was coming from the late French Rococo, then of course you would start to see late French Rococo filigree taking up the backgrounds. That wasn't enough after a while. After a while, it became clear that I wanted the background to start to be in direct competition with the figure, so the background is starting to move forward, demanding space in the painting. It becomes this kind of presentation of the background as a forgotten character, someone who's sort of underthought, undervalued, and non-presented. That same type of tension between black and brown bodies in the walls of museums throughout the world. There's also, I think, just the real technical... yeah.
The metaphorical background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's just tired of being stepped on some level. It's just like demanding to be here. But then the figure is sort of demanding space, so that back and forth. The body language is incredibly important in these paintings as well. If you remember the Van Huysen piece.
Can we go back to the last slide? Let's see.
Yeah.
Oh, here. Yeah. Oh, there you go.
So, if this is a big part of
swagger.
Yeah, sure. This was considered to be the height of masculinity back then. If you look at an old Van Dyck painting, or if you look at Frans Hals, the sort of hand thrown backwards, and the sort of effete thing, this was what powerful men did. When thrown in sharp relief with the black male body, I think we see it as something different. But, signs and body language have always been misconstrued and misconstructed.
One of the most beautiful things I think about walking through your exhibition is the way the subjects in the paintings become performers, and they all react to one another as they hang in their galleries. It's quite remarkable. And so if you switch something around, then you have a different relationship. They have a different relationship, and it's like going to good theater.
Yeah, I rarely think about it that way. That's something that's interesting. You know what that brings up to me is the fact that oftentimes there's a bunch of guys and girls in the studio at the same time when I'm shooting. And so there will be this kind of like competition going on to see who's got the better pose, who's able to pull it off better. And some people really ham it up, and what you're looking at is me trying my best to stay true to that moment. And so the demonstrative aspect, that sort of that thing that occurs there is real, but it's a direct outcropping of competition in the studio.
Now I'm going to ask about the frames because I know people are going to ask. Your frames, which are so over the top, and so, do you think of them as part of the work of art? Are they intended to be an affirmation of the grand tradition of European painting or kind of send up? And here is the frame around one of your equestrians, and it's very similar to the frame around the Fort Worth equestrian Colonel Flattop.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing you have to realize that in these paintings, there are these decorative caps. You can probably see it better in the golden version. On each of those, there's this type of ovaries stuck on the ends. On the surface of those are these sperm cells. They're swimming across the thing. And then, of course, up top is this kind of vaginal shape where my head is popping out.
It's wonderful.
That's right. That's the only time I've shown up in my work. All right, so there's a reason for all this stuff. So, all right, so the frame is actually a means by which to sort of talk about a lot of the sort of charged sexuality that exists within the work. There is presupposed by any exchange in which you stop a complete stranger in the streets and ask them to pose for you, the acknowledgement of the type of physical beauty. If that's a man to a woman, that's a very normal exchange. If that's two guys, then it becomes this hyper sort of homoerotic exchange. But regardless of what it is charged. And within the history of art, there's this type of sexuality that exists within portraiture. People talk about female beauty in paintings quite easily. That's a very facile notion within painting. But I think to think about some of those great David and Ingres paintings as the denouement, the apotheosis of male beauty in painting, I think is a really important one. And we have a rule book for it, right? They've laid it all out there. Generally what happens is that strength and domination with ease are the hallmarks of that. So if you, for example, try to make an equestrian painting such as this, and you did like I did and hired an actual horse, you would be misled, because actually the body in relationship to a horse is a lot more engulfed. The horse is actually much larger in relationship to the body. I'm copying what David did, and David was making the male figure a lot larger. The horses are always seen as these sort of hyper-feminized mane, these sort of very sort of violent, out-of-control things. It's sort of irrational female presence. But then there's always this powerful man who, maybe with a pinky, is controlling everything. The sexuality and the metaphors for sexuality exist within paintings, and I think it was important for me to make that part of it, to sort of draw attention to the self.
It's almost like commentary.
That's right.
It's almost like commentary. Yeah. Interesting. And then, if you could please indulge us and just share with us the backstory of this incredibly striking, your Michael Jackson portrait, which stops everyone in their tracks.
Right. Well, before he died, Michael Jackson called me as it came, like, I was a complete shock. He called the studio, and I said, just ignore that, because I thought it was just a joke. I thought somebody was like playing with me. Michael Jackson doesn't just call people out of the blue. And finally got to the truth of the matter.
He liked it.
Yeah, right. And it was that last photo shoot he was doing for, like, Essence or Ebony, one where he looked like a white woman with a bomb. He ended up getting in contact with the studio We set up a phone meeting, hit it off. A series of conversations began happening back and forth. Mailing of books, art history books, to various hotels. We'd always be changing hotels.
Oh, you liked art history? You knew about art history?
Extraordinary mind for it. I remember actually talking about aspects of Rubens' later brushwork in relationship to the earlier work. I mean, aspects of painting that you just don't get from a more casual or pedestrian understanding of the work. And people don't really understand that about him. I didn't, certainly. And what came out of it was this interesting conversation about armor and how armor functions as both keeping something out and in, right? Armor as this thing that he had spent his entire life creating, but was being sort of controlled and consumed by. There were some really amazing examples of armor painting in our history. We spoke quite a bit about this. This one's actually borrowing largely from a Rubens painting.
Was that at his request, or was that a no-brainer for you?
It was mostly me saying, I think this is where we should go. But it was also informed by all of those conversations that we were having before, surrounding the theatricality, the scale. It's all.